Please come in and join me for a cup of tea. My friends, I wish all I had to share with you was the joys of a young girl growing up on a plantation just north of Charleston. But dears, much has happened since those carefree days before the war. By spring of '61, we knew this war was not going to be short-lived. There were soldiers coming into the Charleston, as many sometimes as 1,000 a day. Many sick, wounded, but more of them were sick, suffering from something we call quick step, which is diarrhea that you might know. Now the last thing I wanted to do was be a nurse and witness all that pain and suffering, but all of our women were obligated to do what we should. We set up hospitals in our home and our churches and our halls, the very halls where we used to have our galas and soirees and balls. Now the young soldiers lie dying and suffering. But it was while I was working at that hospital I first met him. He come riding up on his horse with a very important looking gray hair and a perfectly manicured beard, and when he walked in the hall, he walked so softly that you could hardly hear his leather hit those old plank floors. I knew he was somebody very important, but what his name was I wasn't sure. He spoke to all the soldiers, and just the sight of him seemed to rally them up and give them hope to their pain and suffering. But he passed by a young soldier I'd been sitting with all week, Soldier John. Well, I wanted my Soldier John to meet this grand man, and I asked his name. They told me he was General Robert E. Lee. Well, I knew without doubt that General Robert E. Lee was no ordinary man. He was destined to be a hero. Poor me, little Lizzie ran after him, and I said, "General Lee," and it shouldn't have done such a thing, but he turned back to me without the least bit of arrogance and followed me right back to Soldier John's bedside. Well, he knelt down there on that dirty floor on his bare knees, and he spoke so soft, and his voice was like velvet, and his eyes were so dark and keen, and he prayed for Soldier John. And after he left, I found this on the floor, a Virginia officer button. Well, I called out, but General Lee was gone, and I showed it to Soldier John, and he took it in his hand, and he held it like a precious jewel for the rest of the afternoon. I pulled up a little metal stool there, and I read to him from the Bible, and took a letter to his mother, and of course his sweetheart, and long about the afternoon he said to me, "Lizzie, will you sing to me?" Well, I've never had much of a singing voice, and I said, "Whatever shall I sing?" And he said, "Sing Dixie if you know it." Well, right there I was caught, because what good girl, Southern girl, doesn't know Dixie? So I started singing softly, and before I could finish, all the other soldiers started singing along with me. But before we finished our last chorus, Soldier John's hand opened up, and the button fell to the floor. He was the first one I saw fall. Strange thing about death, some of those soldiers took it screaming and hollering and cursing our good Lord and Savior, while others took it as gentle as the sunset. Chapter 22 from Carolina.